A millionaire finds out his gardener is a virgin and makes her a proposal. She must lose her virginity to gain her freedom. The young gardener, despite her humble role, sparks something unexpected in him. If this story got you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. From the highest floor of his Manhattan penthouse, Ethan Blackwood surveyed the city below with the detached interest of a god viewing his creation. 53 stories up, the noise of the city couldn't reach him, exactly as he preferred it. The distinction between himself and the masses below wasn't just physical, it was existential. They lived in a different world entirely. "Will that be all for today, Mr. Blackwood?" His assistant, Margaret, stood by the doorway, tablet in hand, her posture perfect as always. Ethan didn't turn from the floor-to-ceiling window. "The quarterly reports from the Singapore office? Already reviewed and annotated, sir. I've highlighted the discrepancies in the R&D budget." "The dinner with the Chinese delegation?" "Confirmed for Thursday at Per Se. Private room, as requested." "And the background check on the new staff?" Margaret cleared her throat softly. "All clean except for the gardener. As you suspected, there's something unusual about her application." At this, Ethan finally turned, his expression betraying a flicker of interest. "Unusual how?" "Her references check out superficially, but they're too perfect. No one has a record that clean, and her former employers gave identical responses. Almost rehearsed. I think she may be hiding something." Ethan walked to his desk, a sleek monolith of black marble imported from Italy. He picked up a tablet and scrolled through the file. "Riley Morgan," he read aloud. Her photo showed a woman in her late 20s, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes direct and unflinching, not beautiful in the conventional sense that usually surrounded him, but striking in her plainness, as if she had deliberately chosen to be unremarkable. "Fire her," he said dismissively, setting down the tablet. Margaret hesitated. "The grounds are finally coming along after the redesign, and she's the only one who seems to understand your vision for the Japanese garden. Mr. Chen said her knowledge of indigenous species, adaptable to our climate, is exceptional." Ethan felt a ripple of annoyance. His estate in the Hamptons was his sanctuary. Away from the ceaseless demands of Blackwood Financial, the gardens were his one indulgence in beauty for its own sake, rather than as a display of wealth. "Fine," he said after a moment. "Keep her on, but have security monitor her closely. I don't want any surprises." "Yes, sir." After Margaret left, Ethan returned to the window. At 58, he had built Blackwood Financial from a small investment firm into a global powerhouse. His net worth fluctuated by billions depending on the market, but it had been years since he'd bothered to check the exact figure. What was the point? Beyond a certain threshold, money ceased to be currency and became pure power, his true interest. His phone chimed with a message from Vanessa, his current companion. She was 31, a former model-turned-art dealer who understood the arrangement perfectly, her sophistication and beauty in exchange for access to his world. She was asking about the charity gala that weekend, undoubtedly planning which designer would best complement the Blackwood name. He didn't respond immediately. These relationships had become so predictable, so transactional. 6 months in, and he already knew how this one would end, with a generous parting gift and an amicable understanding that their time together had reached its natural conclusion. There would be no tears, no messy emotions. That was the point. The weekend found him at his Hamptons estate, a 30-acre compound shielded from neighbors and paparazzi by old-growth forest and state-of-the-art security. The main house was a modernist statement of glass and steel, with wings that extended into the landscape like reaching fingers. It had been featured in architectural magazines worldwide, yet Ethan had never felt it was a home, merely the most impressive of his properties. Saturday morning, he walked the grounds alone, inspecting the progress on the Japanese garden. The stone pathways were complete, winding between young maple trees and carefully positioned boulders. The koi pond was taking shape, its edges still raw with recent construction. That's when he saw her, Riley Morgan, kneeling by a bed of newly planted shrubs, her hands deep in the dark soil. Unlike his other staff who scattered at his approach, she continued working, either unaware of his presence or deliberately ignoring it. "Those aren't the azaleas I specified," Ethan said, stopping a few feet away. Without looking up, she replied, "No, they're not. The Satsuki azaleas you wanted wouldn't survive our winters without special protection. These are rhododendron schlippenbachie, Korean azaleas. They'll give you the same effect, but can handle the climate." Her directness startled him. Most employees would have apologized, promised to replace them, or offered excuses. Instead, she had simply stated facts, challenging his decision with her expertise. "I don't recall asking for substitutions," he said coldly. Now she looked up, shielding her eyes from the morning sun with a soil-stained hand. "You asked for a garden that would be beautiful year-round. That means plants that will thrive, not just survive. If you prefer to waste money replacing dead shrubs every spring, I can order the Satsuki on Monday." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. No one spoke to him this way, certainly not someone he employed. He should fire her on the spot, make an example of her insolence. Instead, he found himself curious. "How long have you worked with plants?" "All my life." She stood, brushing soil from her knees. Up close, he noticed her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, clear and direct. "My grandmother had a plant nursery in Vermont. I grew up learning which plants belong where. And what brings you to work for me? I doubt my salary competes with commercial landscaping." Something guarded passed across her face. The challenge. Not many private gardens have this scale or ambition. It wasn't the complete truth. Ethan had built his fortune on reading people, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Interesting. "Finish the eastern section by the end of next week," he said. "I'm hosting an event and I want it presentable." "It'll be ready," she replied, then turned back to her work, effectively dismissing him. As he walked away, Ethan realized it had been years since anyone had treated him as just a man rather than Ethan Blackwood, financial titan and power broker. It was unsettling. That evening, at dinner with Vanessa and two couples from his social circle, Ethan found his mind wandering. Jeremy Collins, CEO of a tech startup Blackwood had recently acquired, was regaling them with a story about his latest yacht purchase, while his wife, Rebecca, laughed too loudly, her diamond bracelet catching the light with each gesture. "Ethan?" Vanessa's voice cut through his thoughts. "Jeremy asked about your position on the Fed's new regulatory framework." He provided a practiced response about market adaptation and long-term strategy, words that would be quoted in financial blogs. The next day, the conversation flowed around him. Investments, properties, political connections, the currency of their world. "I hear the Arlington's daughter finally got engaged," Rebecca Collins said during dessert, "to that surgeon from Boston. Poor girl, almost 30 and only now getting married. Her mother must be relieved." Speaking of gardens, Vanessa smoothly changed the subject, placing her hand on Ethan's arm. "You must tell them about the Japanese landscape designer you flew in, darling. The one who trained in Kyoto." Ethan realized she was referring to Riley, transforming the gardener into something more exotic, more worthy of their world. The casual lie irritated him for reasons he couldn't articulate. "Actually, the design is by Chen Landscape Architecture," he corrected. "The implementation is being handled by their team and our in-house gardener." Vanessa's hand tightened slightly on his arm, a warning that he had contradicted her. He ignored it, turning the conversation to Jeremy's upcoming IPO. Later that night, after their guests had departed and Vanessa had gone to bed, Ethan stood on the terrace overlooking the darkened garden. In the distance, the ocean murmured against the private beach, a constant reminder of forces even his wealth couldn't control. His mind returned to Riley Morgan. There was something about her that didn't fit, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. Her file said she was 28, single, with a degree in botany from UVM. No social media presence, unusual for her generation. No family mentioned. The background check had found no red flags, but also curiously little depth. It was as if she had deliberately made herself forgettable. Yet she was the opposite of forgettable in person. Her confidence, the way she stood, her ground. It wasn't the behavior of someone with nothing to hide. Ethan prided himself on solving complex problems, on seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. Riley Morgan was becoming a puzzle he wanted to solve, a mystery in the orderly world he controlled so completely. He made a mental note to have Margaret arrange for him to be at the estate more often in the coming weeks. He would observe this. Gardner himself, discover what she was hiding. Everyone had secrets, after all. Everyone had a price. What Ethan didn't recognize was that for the first time in decades, he was genuinely intrigued by another person, not for what they could offer him, but for who they might be beneath the surface. It was a dangerous first step on a path he didn't even know he was beginning to walk. The next morning, he instructed his head of security to increase surveillance on Riley Morgan. "I want to know everything. Where she goes, who she speaks with, what she does in her off hours." "Yes, sir. Any particular concerns?" Ethan stared out at the garden where a distant figure knelt among the plants, seemingly oblivious to the power, focused upon her. "Just a feeling," he said quietly. "Something isn't right." What he didn't say was that the something that wasn't right might be his own unexpected reaction to her, a fascination he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. In the 2 weeks that followed, Ethan found increasingly thin reasons to visit the Hamptons estate. Board meetings conveniently scheduled to end early on Fridays. Documents that required his personal review in the peace of his home office. A sudden interest in the progress of the Japanese garden that couldn't be satisfied by photos and reports. Each time, he made a point of walking the grounds, offering critiques on the landscaping that inevitably led to encounters with Riley. Each conversation was a strange battle of wills, his authority against her expertise, his commands against her practical amendments. "The moss garden needs to be fuller," he told her on a cloudy Tuesday morning. Riley didn't look up from where she was carefully placing stones. "Moss takes time to establish. You can't rush it no matter how much money you throw at it. Then bring in mature moss from elsewhere. And watch it die because it hasn't adapted to this environment? That would be wasteful." She finally stood, facing him directly. "Some things can't be bought, Mr. Blackwood. They have to be cultivated." It was the same pattern every time. Her quiet resistance to his assumption that everything had a price, that anything could be expedited with sufficient resources. Her immunity to his power both frustrated and fascinated him. The security reports on her were oddly mundane. She lived alone in a small apartment in Southampton, drove a 10-year-old Subaru, and spent most of her free time at a local nursery or walking on public beaches during off hours. No romantic relationships, few friends. Her only regular contact was with an elderly woman in a nursing home in Connecticut, whom she visited every Sunday. Relationship unknown. "Have we checked her financials?" Ethan asked his head of security over a secure line. "Yes, sir. Nothing unusual. Modest savings, student loans nearly paid off. No unexplained deposits or withdrawals. Medical records? Clean bill of health, regular checkups, no major illnesses. Or hospitalizations." Ethan frowned. "There has to be something. Nobody is this uncomplicated." "If I may, sir," the security chief ventured, "sometimes people really are what they appear to be." But Ethan wasn't convinced. In his experience, everyone had something to hide, some weakness or secret desire that could be leveraged. He just hadn't found hers yet. His opportunity came unexpectedly during a summer storm that swept in from the Atlantic, bringing driving rain and winds that bent the young maples in the garden. Ethan had stayed at the estate to prepare for an important conference call with Tokyo when the power went out. His backup generators kicked in immediately, but he found himself drawn to the windows, watching the storm's fury. Through the sheets of rain he spotted a figure hurrying toward the gardener's shed. Riley apparently caught out in the deluge. Acting on impulse, Ethan grabbed an umbrella and headed outside. The wind nearly tore it from his grasp as he made his way across the lawn. By the time he reached the shed, he was as soaked as if he'd had no umbrella at all. Riley was just inside, wringing water from her hair. She looked up in surprise when he appeared in the doorway. Mr. Blackwood, you should come to the house until this passes, he said, trying to sound merely practical rather than concerned. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the invitation. I'm fine here. I need to check on the new plantings anyway once the rain eases. Don't be ridiculous, the storm might last hours. He looked around the small shed with obvious disdain. It was meticulously organized, tools hanging in precise order, seeds and bulbs in labeled containers, but hardly a place to wait out a storm. A clash of thunder punctuated his point, and Riley finally nodded. Just until it passes, she agreed. They made their way back to the house in silence, the shared umbrella doing little to protect either of them. Inside, Ethan instructed the housekeeper to bring dry towels and clothes. I'll ask Vanessa's driver to drop off something suitable, he said, referring to the collection of designer clothing his girlfriend kept at the estate. I'd rather just dry what I'm wearing, Riley replied, accepting a towel from the housekeeper but declining to follow her upstairs. Ethan found her stubbornness both irritating and intriguing. Most people in her position would jump at the chance to wear designer labels, to sample the luxury of his world. Her resistance to these small temptations suggested a deeper immunity to what he could offer. Fine, he conceded. Maria can put your clothes in the dryer. In the meantime, I have calls to make. But instead of retreating to his office, Ethan found himself offering her a tour of the house's main floor. He told himself it was to keep her occupied, to observe her reactions to his wealth. In truth, he was postponing his work in favor of her company, something he hadn't done for anyone in years. Riley followed him through the modernist spaces with polite interest, but none of the awe or envy he was accustomed to seeing. In the central gallery, where his collection of contemporary art was displayed, she paused before a large canvas of violent red slashes against a black background. Do you like it? He asked. Does it matter? She countered. You didn't buy it for others to like. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Because nothing else in this house is meant to please anyone but you. She gestured around. Perfect views, perfect art, perfect furniture, all chosen to reflect your taste, your status. There's nothing here that suggests compromise or consideration of another person's comfort. Her assessment was so blunt, so unexpectedly perceptive, that Ethan felt momentarily exposed. You derive all that from my art collection? From the whole house. It's a beautiful prison you've built, Mr. Blackwood. I'm just not sure if it's designed to keep others out or to keep you in. For a moment, they stood in silence, the rain lashing against the windows providing the only sound. Ethan was unused to being analyzed, especially by someone who should be intimidated by him. You have an unusual perspective for a gardener, he said finally. A small smile touched her lips. Plants are honest. They show you exactly what they need and who they are. People could learn from them. Later, after her clothes had dried and the storm had passed, Ethan watched from his office window as Riley returned to the garden, checking for damage from the wind. Their conversation had left him unsettled in a way business rivals and market crashes never had. The next day, he instructed Margaret to compile a more thorough background check on Riley Morgan, going back to her childhood. I want to know everything. School records, family history, past relationships. Everything. May I ask why, sir? Has she done something concerning? Just do it, he snapped, then softened his tone. Consider it due diligence. The report arrived 3 days later. Riley Morgan had grown up in a small town in Vermont, the only child of strict religious parents. Her father had been a deacon in the local church, her mother a homemaker known for her community work. By all accounts, Riley's childhood had been governed by rigid moral expectations and limited exposure to the outside world. Her parents had perished in a car accident during her senior year of high school. She'd been raised thereafter by her maternal grandmother, the owner of the plant nursery she'd mentioned. College records showed a scholarship student who worked multiple jobs while maintaining excellent grades. No serious relationships on record, though she dated occasionally in college. The elderly woman she visited weekly was her grandmother, now suffering from advancing dementia and residing in an expensive care facility, the kind that would consume Riley's entire salary and then some. One detail in particular caught Ethan's attention. A note from a former employer describing Riley as intensely private about her personal life, and mentioning that she had once declined to attend a company pool party, citing discomfort with swimwear. It was a small thing, but it nagged at him. Combined with her upbringing in a strict religious household, it suggested a level of modesty that was increasingly rare in modern America. A theory began to form in Ethan's mind, one he found oddly compelling. Could it be that Riley, shaped by her conservative upbringing and sheltered childhood, had maintained a level of innocence that explained her immunity to the material temptations others so readily succumbed to? The thought shouldn't have intrigued him as much as it did. At 58, Ethan had seen and experienced everything money and power could provide. The idea that something as simple as virtue could resist his influence was both challenging and strangely alluring. He needed to know if his theory was correct. Not for any practical reason. Riley was, after all, just a gardener, but because the puzzle of her had become an obsession he couldn't shake. The opportunity presented itself the following weekend. Vanessa had organized a small gathering at the pool, a dozen of their social circle lounging in designer swimwear, drinking champagne and discussing vacation. Properties. Ethan, bored as usual with the empty conversations, noticed Riley working near the rose garden, far enough from the pool to maintain propriety but close enough to be visible. He excused himself and walked over to where she was pruning the climbing roses that framed the garden entrance. "You should join us," he said without preamble. "Take a break, have a swim." Riley glanced toward the pool party, then back to her work. "I'm fine here, thank you." "I insist," Ethan pressed. "It's nearly 90 degrees. The water would be refreshing." She met his eyes, and he saw the moment she recognized his challenge for what it was. "I didn't bring appropriate attire," she said evenly. "I'm sure Vanessa has something that would fit you," he persisted, watching her carefully. "I prefer not to swim in borrowed clothes," Riley replied, her tone cooling. "And I have work to finish before the day ends." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What are you afraid of, Ms. Morgan? It's just water." Something flashed in her amber eyes, not fear, but a fierce kind of pride. "I'm not afraid, Mr. Blackwood. I simply choose when and where I make myself vulnerable. That's not something I do for an employer's entertainment." With that, she turned back to the roses, her dismissal as clear as if she'd walked away. Ethan returned to the pool, his mind racing. Her reaction confirmed his suspicions. There was something deeply private about Riley Morgan, something she protected with the same care she showed his garden. The question was, what exactly was she guarding so carefully? That evening, after the guests had departed and Vanessa had retired with a migraine, Ethan sat in his study, reviewing financial reports. But his mind kept returning to Riley, to the quiet defiance in her eyes when she'd refused his invitation. On impulse, he pulled up the security camera feeds on his tablet. Most of the property was dark now, but a light still burned in the gardener's shed. He zoomed in and saw Riley at a small desk, writing in what appeared to be a journal. As he watched, she closed the notebook, placed it in a drawer and locked it, a curiously old-fashioned action in a digital age. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan felt genuine curiosity about another person's inner life. What did she write in that journal? What thoughts, what secrets did she commit to paper rather than pixels? More importantly, why did he care? She was an employee, one of dozens who maintained his lifestyle. Her private thoughts should be irrelevant to him. Yet as he prepared for bed that night, Ethan found himself standing at the window, looking out toward the darkened garden. Somewhere out there, beyond his reach, Riley Morgan was going about her. Life, untouched by his wealth and power, the thought bothered him more than it should. "I need to see what's in that journal," he told himself. Not because it mattered, but because nothing in his world was supposed to be beyond his reach. It was a matter of principle. At least, that's what he told himself as he drifted into uneasy sleep. Dreams filled with gardens he couldn't control, and a woman who looked at him as if his money meant nothing at all. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala was traditionally held in Manhattan, but this year Ethan had insisted on hosting it at his Hamptons estate. He told the board it was to showcase the property's sustainability features, solar panels hidden in the architecture, a rainwater collection system, geothermal heating. In reality, he wanted an excuse to speed up work on the gardens. "I need everything perfect in 3 weeks," he informed Riley on a sweltering July morning. "Whatever resources you need. Additional staff, materials, equipment, just say the word." She looked up from the irrigation system she was adjusting, her face flushed from the heat. "Throwing money at plants doesn't make them grow faster, Mr. Blackwood." "Then what does?" "Time, care, understanding what they need rather than what you want from them." She stood, wiping her hands on her work pants. "But we'll get as close to your vision as nature allows." Ethan found himself lingering, watching as she meticulously checked each drip line. "The woman you visit every Sunday, that's your grandmother?" Riley's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Yes, she raised me after my parents were gone. She's in an expensive facility." Now she did look up, her expression guarded. "Are you monitoring my personal life, Mr. Blackwood?" "I conduct thorough background checks on all my employees," he replied smoothly. "Standard procedure." "Is it also standard procedure to research their family members?" "It's standard procedure to understand potential vulnerabilities." Riley's jaw tightened. "My grandmother is not a vulnerability. She's the reason I am who I am." "And who is that exactly?" Ethan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Someone who knows the difference between price and value," she replied, returning to her work. The exchange stayed with Ethan throughout the day. During a video conference with his executive team, he found himself distracted, thinking about Riley's words. Price versus value. Such a simple distinction, yet one he'd blurred in his own life for decades. That evening, he made an unusual decision. Instead of dining with Vanessa, who had arrived from the city with a car full of shopping bags, he took a solitary walk through the gardens at sunset. The Japanese garden was coming along beautifully, despite Riley's warnings about rushed timelines. The stone pathways wound through carefully placed rocks and young trees, selected for their sculptural forms. Near the koi pond, which was now filled and functioning, he found Riley on her knees, planting what looked like ground cover between stepping stones. "You work late," he observed. She didn't startle at his voice, as if she'd been aware of his approach all along. "The evenings are cooler, better for transplanting." Ethan watched her methodical movements, the way she created a perfect hole, gently placed, each plant and firmed the soil around it with a practiced touch. There was something almost meditative about her process. "When the gala's over, would you consider overseeing the renovation of my other property's landscaping? The Manhattan penthouse has a terrace garden that's never quite worked, and the place in Aspen could use your expertise." Riley sat back on her heels, studying him with a puzzled expression. "Why would you want that? I'm just a gardener, not a landscape architect." "Oh, you're not just anything," Ethan replied, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "You have a vision and the skill to execute it. That's rare." A small crease appeared between her brows. "Mr. Blackwood, may I speak candidly? I've noticed you rarely speak any other way. You've been watching me for weeks now, following me around the property, asking personal questions, checking my background. I'd like to know why." The directness of her question caught him off guard. In his world, people approached him obliquely, with flattery and careful phrasing. Riley's bluntness was like a splash of cold water. "I find you interesting," he admitted after a moment. "You're different from most people I encounter." "Different how?" Ethan considered his words carefully. "Most people I meet want something from me. Money, connections, status. You seem immune to all that." Riley returned to her planting. "Or maybe I just want different things." "Like what?" "Like finishing this garden before dark." But there was a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Ethan found himself smiling in return, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar on his face. "I'll leave you to it then." As he walked back to the house, he realized he felt lighter somehow, as if the conversation had shifted something subtle but significant within him. The feeling didn't last long. In the main house, he found Vanessa waiting, her expression taut with irritation. "Where have you been?" The caterers called with questions about the gala menu. and I couldn't reach you." "Walking the grounds," he replied, pouring himself a scotch from the bar cart. "The gardens are coming along well." Vanessa gave him a calculating look. "You've been spending a lot of time walking the grounds lately. Anything to do with that gardener girl?" "Her name is Riley," Ethan said, the edge in his voice surprising both of them. "And yes, I've been consulting with her about the landscaping. The gala is important." "Of course it is." Vanessa's tone was honey over steel. "Though I wonder what your board would think of you personally supervising gardening details." It was a subtle reminder of the separate spheres they inhabited, his world of high finance and her world of social management. Both had always understood the boundaries. "The board trusts my judgment," he replied coolly. "Now what did the caterers need?" Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself reviewing the security footage again. The light in the gardener's shed was still on at 11 p.m. He watched as Riley worked at her small desk, drawing what appeared to be garden plans. Then she pulled out the journal he'd seen before, wrote in it briefly, and locked it away again. The next morning, he made a decision. While Riley was working on the far side of the property, Ethan had his head of security unlock the shed and retrieve the journal. It was a violation of privacy, certainly, but Ethan had long ago stopped concerning himself with such niceties. Information was power, and he needed to understand what made Riley Morgan tick. In his study, door locked, he opened the plain black notebook. The first pages contained garden sketches and plant lists, professional notes, nothing personal. But as he continued, the entries became more introspective. "Dad always said that purity was a woman's most precious gift," one entry read. "That once given away, she could never get it back. I used to believe him, used to think my value was tied to that one aspect of myself. Now I wonder, what value system makes a woman's worth dependent on what she hasn't done rather than what she has? Still, I keep this part of myself intact. Not for him anymore, and not for some future husband as he intended, but because it's become a form of power, my choice, my terms, my timeline." Ethan sat back, processing what he'd just read. His suspicions had been correct. Riley was indeed a virgin, though not for the religious reasons he'd assumed. It was a conscious choice, a form of control in a world that sought to control women like her. He continued reading, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with his invasion of her privacy, yet unable to stop. Grandmother asked again about marriage. "Today," a more recent entry stated, "I couldn't tell her the truth, that I'm afraid of being consumed by someone else's life the way Mom was by Dad's, that I've seen too many women disappear into relationships where their needs come second, that I'd rather be alone than lost. And then, just a week ago, the way he watches me is different from other men. Not just desire, he has that too, I'm not naive, but curiosity, as if I'm a puzzle he can't solve. It would be flattering if it weren't dangerous. Men like Ethan Blackwood aren't used to obstacles. When they want something, they take it. Need to be careful." Ethan closed the journal, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. She had seen right through him, recognized his growing obsession before he'd fully admitted it to himself, and she was right to be wary. The thought disturbed him more than it should have. He returned the journal to security with instructions to replace it exactly as they'd found it. Then he retreated to his home office, cancelling his meetings for the day, claiming a migraine. In truth, he needed time to think, to understand why Riley's words had affected him so deeply. He'd had beautiful women before, powerful women, brilliant women. Why was he fixated on a gardener who wanted nothing from him? Perhaps that was precisely it. She wanted nothing. In his world of constant transactions, Riley Morgan stood apart, complete in herself. Her virginity wasn't what fascinated him, he realized now. It was what it represented, her absolute autonomy, her refusal to be defined by others' expectations or desires, including his. The week of the gala arrived, bringing with it an army of staff to prepare the estate. Florists, caterers, lighting, specialists, security. The peaceful grounds were suddenly teeming with activity. Through it all, Riley worked steadily on the gardens, now nearly complete and stunning in their understated elegance. Ethan made a point of staying away from her, disturbed by his own thoughts, and the knowledge that she was right to be cautious around him. Instead, he threw himself into final preparations with Vanessa, who had practically moved in to oversee every detail of the event. The night before the gala, he stood on his bedroom balcony, looking out over the illuminated gardens. The landscape, lighting had been installed that day, transforming the spaces into something magical. Stone lanterns lined the paths, while subtle uplighting highlighted the sculptural forms of trees and rocks. The koi pond reflected the stars, its surface occasionally broken by the lazy movement of golden fish. It was exactly as he'd envisioned, yet better somehow, infused with a natural harmony he hadn't specified, but which Riley had understood instinctively. Movement caught his eye, a figure walking the garden paths in the moonlight. Riley taking a final survey of her work. She moved with quiet confidence through the spaces she had helped create, pausing occasionally to adjust a light or check a plant. Without conscious decision, Ethan found himself heading downstairs and out into the night. He caught up with her near the bamboo grove, its tall stems rustling softly in the evening breeze. "It's perfect," he said simply. Riley turned, momentarily startled before her features composed themselves. "Thank you. Your guests should be impressed." "I don't care what they think," Ethan replied truthfully. This was never about them. She studied him in the dim light. Then what was it about? Creating something beautiful. He gestured to the garden around them. Something real. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and for a moment neither spoke. The usual barriers, employer and employee, wealth and work, power and service, seemed to dissolve in the garden's tranquility. "You should go inside," Riley said finally, breaking the spell. "Big day tomorrow." "Walk with me first," Ethan suggested, indicating the stone path that wound through the garden. To his surprise, she nodded. They strolled in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the distant murmur of the ocean. The night air was heavy with the scent of jasmine and salt. "I read your journal," Ethan said suddenly, the confession bursting from him unexpectedly. Riley stopped walking, her body tensing visibly. "You what?" "I had security take it from your shed." "I read it." He turned to face her directly. "I know I shouldn't have. It was a violation of your privacy." Her face hardened, amber eyes flashing with anger. "Why are you telling me this? To ease your conscience?" "Because I need you to understand something." Ethan took a deep breath. "I've spent my life acquiring things, companies, properties, artwork, people. When something interests me, I buy it or control it or possess it somehow. It's what I know how to do." "And you thought you could do the same with me?" Her voice was cold, controlled. "Yes," he admitted, "at first, but the more I tried to figure you out, to classify you somehow, the more I realized that what fascinates me about you is precisely that you can't be acquired." Riley crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "So I'm just another challenge? Something you haven't managed to collect yet?" "No." Ethan struggled to articulate what he was feeling, emotions unfamiliar after decades of calculated exchanges. "You're the first person in years who has made me question the way I live, the way I relate to people, to myself." "Mr. Blackwood." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Mr. Blackwood," she repeated firmly. "I think you're confusing curiosity with something deeper. You've built an empire on control, and I represent something you can't control. It's novelty, not meaning." Her insight struck uncomfortably close to the truth, making Ethan defensive. "You think you have me figured out? A lonely rich man looking for something authentic? It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Riley's gaze was direct, penetrating. "You have everything money can buy, but you've forgotten how to value what can't be purchased. Your wealth isn't just in your bank accounts, it's in the walls you've built around yourself." The accuracy of her assessment shook him. For decades, he'd cultivated an image of invulnerability, of complete self-sufficiency. Now this woman, this gardener, was seeing through his defenses as if they were glass. "Tomorrow night," he said impulsively, "after the gala, I want to offer you something." Wariness crept into her expression. "What kind of something?" Freedom. Real freedom. Ethan's mind was racing now, formulating a plan. "Come to my study after the guests leave, midnight. I have a proposition for you." "I don't make deals in private with men who spy on me," Riley replied coldly. "It's not what you think," Ethan insisted. "Please just hear me out tomorrow night. If you don't like what I have to say, you can walk away with a year's salary as compensation for my invasion of your privacy." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Finally, she nodded once. "Midnight, but I make no promises about staying to listen." With that, she turned and walked away, her silhouette gradually fading into the darkness of the garden. Ethan watched her go, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by what he planned to do, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the early hungry days of building his fortune. For the first time in decades, he was about to take a risk with no guaranteed return, and he found himself strangely at peace with the uncertainty. The night of the gala arrived with picture-perfect weather, a warm summer evening cooled by gentle ocean breezes. The estate was transformed, with valets parking a fleet of luxury cars and staff in crisp uniforms directing guests along candle-lit paths. From the second-floor window of his dressing room, Ethan watched the glittering crowd below. Board members, business associates, politicians, celebrities, the elite of New York society mingling in his Japanese garden, drinks in hand, admiring the beauty Riley had created. "You look distracted," Vanessa said, appearing in the doorway. She wore a midnight blue gown that shimmered with subtle beading, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. Against her throat gleamed the sapphire necklace he'd given her for her birthday, a designer piece that had cost more than most people's homes. "Just thinking about my speech," Ethan replied, adjusting his bow tie. "The Foundation's new initiative is important." "Of course it is." Vanessa crossed the room and straightened his already perfect tie, a practiced gesture of intimacy. "Education. In underserved communities, sustainable development, all very noble. The board will be impressed with your vision." There was a subtle emphasis on vision that made Ethan look at her more closely. For the first time, he noticed the calculation behind her attentiveness, the performance of devotion that had nothing to do with genuine affection. How had he never seen it before? "We should go down," he said. "Guests are arriving." The next hours passed in a blur of handshakes, air kisses, and carefully calibrated small talk. Ethan moved through the crowd with practiced ease, discussing market trends with Wall Street peers, global initiatives with diplomats, patronage with artists, all while keeping one eye on the garden, where staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. He caught occasional glimpses of Riley, not in her work clothes but in a simple black dress, discreetly overseeing the landscape lighting and ensuring the garden remained perfect throughout the evening. She blended seamlessly with the catering staff, nearly invisible to the guests but omnipresent to his increasingly distracted gaze. "Your speech in 10 minutes, Margaret reminded him, appearing at his elbow with professional efficiency. "The AV team is ready whenever you are." Ethan nodded, excusing himself from a conversation with a hedge fund manager whose name he'd already forgotten. As he made his way toward the temporary stage set up near the koi pond, Senator Williams intercepted him. "Ethan, remarkable event," the politician said, clasping his hand. "The rumors about your retirement must be greatly exaggerated. A man doesn't create something like this if he's planning to step back." "Retirement?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I haven't announced any such plans." The senator looked momentarily discomfited. "My mistake. I must have misunderstood something Vanessa mentioned at the Grayson benefit last month. She seemed to imply you were considering a more advisory role at Blackwood." Before Ethan could respond, the program director was gesturing for him to take the stage. He filed away the senator's comment for later consideration and stepped up to the microphone. His speech was brief and well received, a 10-minute overview of the Blackwood Foundation's commitment to sustainable development and educational access, punctuated by the announcement of a $50 million grant program for renewable energy research. The assembled guests applauded appropriately, phones capturing the moment for social media, journalists noting key quotes for morning headlines. As the formal program concluded and the party transitioned to dancing under the stars, Ethan found himself increasingly restless. The conversations around him, about vacation properties in the south of France, about which hedge funds were overperforming, about the latest plastic surgeon everyone was using, seemed not just trivial, but utterly disconnected from anything real. Near midnight, as the party showed no signs of winding down, Ethan slipped away from the crowd. He nodded to his security team, indicating he wasn't to be followed, and made his way to his study in the east wing of the house. The room was his sanctuary, walls lined with first editions, a massive desk of reclaimed teak, windows overlooking the Atlantic. He poured himself a scotch, not his usual measured amount, but a generous pour, and waited. At precisely midnight, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called, his heart racing with an anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. Riley entered, still in the simple black dress she'd worn to blend in with the staff. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot, her only jewelry small pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, a detail Ethan knew from her file but found himself oddly moved by. "You wanted to see me," she said, remaining near the door. "Thank you for coming." Ethan gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit." She did so, perching on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. Her posture was guarded, her eyes wary. "I've been thinking about what you wrote in your journal," Ethan began, turning his crystal tumbler in his hands. "About choice and control. About how you've kept something precious to yourself, not because of religious belief or moral obligation, but as an act of autonomy." Riley's expression remained neutral, though a faint flush colored her cheeks. "You had no right to read those thoughts." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I'm not proud of the invasion, but it helped me understand something important." "About me?" "About myself." Ethan set down his drink and leaned forward. "All my life, I've believed that everything has a price. That with enough money or power or influence, anything can be acquired. Any person can be influenced. Any obstacle overcome." Riley's amber eyes were steady on his face, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "But you," he continued, "you represent something different. Something I can't buy or control or possess, and it's made me question everything." "I'm not." "An object lesson, Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly. "My choices are my own, not a philosophical point for your enlightenment." "I understand that." Ethan took a deep breath. "That's why I want to make you an offer." Wariness flickered across her face. "What kind of offer?" "Freedom," he said simply. "Real freedom. I want to set up a trust for your grandmother, enough to cover her care for the rest of her life at the highest level of service, and I want to give you a grant, $5 million, to create your own nursery business, no strings attached." Riley's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing in suspicion. "In exchange for what?" Ethan met her gaze directly. "In exchange for your virginity." The words hung in the air between them, stark and unadorned. Riley's face registered shock, then disgust, then a cold anger that made her eyes flash like amber fire. "You think you can buy that from me?" Her voice was low, controlled, but trembling with rage. "After everything you read in my journal, my most private thoughts, you still think this is about a transaction?" "No," Ethan said quickly, realizing his error. "That's not what I meant." "Please hear me out completely." She stood abruptly. "I don't need to hear anything else. I thought—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. We're done here." "Riley, wait." Ethan rose, circling the desk to stand before her. "I'm not explaining this well. I don't want to take something from you. I want to give you a choice." "A choice?" She laughed, bitterly. "Between what? My dignity and financial security. That's not a choice, Mr. Blackwood. That's manipulation." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his own inability to express what he meant. "No, you misunderstand. The money, the trust, they're yours regardless. I'm not trying to buy you." Riley stared at him, confusion replacing anger. "Then what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing a test," Ethan said quietly. "Not for you. For me." He walked to the window, looking out at the party still in full swing on the garden paths, the guests dancing under the stars, drinking his champagne, admiring his wealth. All of it suddenly seemed hollow, a gilded cage of his own making. "All my life I've measured success by what I could acquire," he continued. "Companies, properties, art, people. They were all just possessions to me. Status symbols. I collected experiences the way other men collect vintage cars. I thought it made me powerful." He turned back to face her. "But you made me see that the real power is in being able to walk away, in being complete in yourself, not defined by what you own or control." Riley's expression was guarded, but she hadn't left. That was something. "The money is yours, no strings attached," Ethan said firmly. "You've more than earned it with your work here, and your grandmother deserves the best care possible. That part is settled." "Then what's the test?" Ethan took a deep breath. "The test is whether I can let you go, whether I can accept that there are things in this world that can't be bought or controlled or possessed, whether I can find value in something I don't own." Riley studied him, her amber eyes penetrating. "And my virginity? What role does that play in this philosophical experiment of yours?" "It represents the one thing about you that is completely yours," Ethan said simply. "The one thing no one else has ever had. I thought by offering to buy it, and then immediately telling you that you didn't have to sell it, I would be proving something to myself. That I could want something desperately and still choose not to take it. That I could overcome the acquisitive instinct that has driven me all my life." He shook his head ruefully. "I see now how insulting that was, how it reduced you to a symbol in my personal growth story. I apologize." Riley was silent for a long moment, processing his words. "When—" She finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "You're right, it was insulting and presumptuous and deeply misguided." Ethan nodded, accepting the rebuke. "But," she continued, "I understand what you were trying to do in your awkward, entitled way." A hint of a smile touched her lips, softening the criticism. She moved to the bookshelf, examining the leather-bound volumes with careful fingers. "You know, in all your research into my background, did you ever wonder why I chose to study botany, why I dedicated my life to plants?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "I assumed it was because of your grandmother, the nursery." "Partly," Riley acknowledged, "but there's more to it. Plants have a wisdom we've forgotten. They know how to grow toward light, how to bend with the wind instead of breaking, how to put down deep roots. They don't worry about what other plants are doing, or whether they're beautiful enough or rich enough or powerful enough. They just focus on what they need to thrive." She turned to face him. "When my parents died, I was lost. My father had controlled every aspect of my life, what I wore, who I spoke to, what I believed. When he was gone, I had no idea who I was without his rules. My grandmother saw this, and she took me to her nursery, put my hands in the soil, taught me to grow things." Ethan listened, captivated by this glimpse into her past. "The first thing she taught me was that you can't force a plant to grow. You can only create the conditions it needs and then let it be." Riley's eyes were distant with memory. It was the opposite of how I'd been raised. My father believed in control, in imposing his will. My grandmother believed in nurturing potential, in patience. She moved closer to Ethan, her gaze direct. "You've spent your life like my father, controlling, manipulating, imposing your will. But gardens can't be built that way. Neither can relationships, neither can people." The truth of her words struck Ethan with unexpected force. All his life he had approached human connections the same way he approached business acquisitions, assessing value, negotiating terms, maintaining control. He had never allowed himself the vulnerability of genuine connection. "I don't know how to be any other way," he admitted quietly. "Yes, you do," Riley replied. "I've seen glimpses of it when you walk in the garden, when you forget to be Ethan, Blackwood financial titan, and allow yourself to simply be a man appreciating beauty. You know how to be still, how to observe, how to appreciate without possessing. You've just forgotten how to apply those qualities to people." A commotion from outside interrupted them, raised voices, the sound of running feet. The study door burst open and Margaret appeared, her professional composure for once disturbed. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a situation," she said urgently. "Miss Winters has had too much to drink. She's making a scene, saying things about you and the company to the press. Security is trying to manage it, but—" Ethan's first instinct was anger, at the interruption, at Vanessa's indiscretion, at the potential PR disaster. But then he looked at Riley, standing quietly by the bookshelf, and felt a strange calm descend. "Tell security to escort Ms. Winters to her room to rest," he said evenly. "Provide the press with complimentary car service home, with my apologies, for the early end to the evening. The party is over." Margaret looked startled by his composed response, but nodded and withdrew to carry out his instructions. When they were alone again, Ethan turned back to Riley. "It seems I have some damage. Control to attend to." "Yes," she agreed, "you do." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The money you offered, use it to set up a scholarship fund instead, for students studying sustainable agriculture and native plant restoration. My grandmother would appreciate that more than private care." "And you?" Ethan asked. "What would you appreciate?" Riley considered for a moment. "The chance to finish what we started here. The garden is just beginning. It needs years to mature to become what it's meant to be. Plants need time, Mr. Blackwood. They can't be rushed." "And neither can you," he said, understanding finally dawning. She smiled, a genuine expression. That transformed her face. "Neither can either of us. Good night, Mr. Blackwood." After she left, Ethan remained in his study, listening to the sounds of the party dispersing, cars departing, staff cleaning up, the house settling back into silence. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace. The next morning, Ethan found Vanessa packing her things, nursing both a hangover and wounded pride. "I assume our arrangement is over," she said coolly, not meeting his eyes. "After last night's indiscretion. What exactly did you say to Senator Williams about my retirement?" Ethan asked, leaning against the doorframe. Vanessa's hands stilled momentarily, before continuing to fold a silk blouse. "Just that you were considering options, that the company might benefit from new leadership, standard gossip." At whose suggestion? Her silence was answer enough. "Jenkins," Ethan guessed, naming his ambitious CFO. "He's been courting board members for months. Needed a friendly insider to plant the seeds of doubt about my commitment." "It's nothing personal," Vanessa said, finally looking up. "Just business. Everyone knows you've been distracted lately, spending more time here than in Manhattan. The garden project, the mysterious gardener, people talk." Ethan nodded, surprisingly untroubled by the revelation. "You're right, I have been distracted. Or maybe for the first time in decades, I've been paying attention to what actually matters." He helped her carry her luggage downstairs, where a car was waiting to take her back to the city. Their goodbye was civil, even warm, two people acknowledging the end of a mutually beneficial arrangement with no hard feelings. As her car disappeared down the driveway, Ethan turned to find Riley crossing the lawn toward the Japanese garden, tools in hand, ready for another day of tending to new growth. She nodded to him, a simple acknowledgement before continuing on her way. Ethan watched her go, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was content to let something unfold at its own pace, to nurture rather than possess, to appreciate beauty without needing to control it. Later that week, he called Margaret into his office in Manhattan. "I need you to clear my schedule for the next month," he instructed. "And contact the board about an emergency meeting." "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, concerned. "Better than all right," Ethan replied. "I'm going to propose a new corporate structure, one that allows me to step back from day-to-day operations and focus on the foundation's work. It's time for a change." "And the Hamptons property?" Margaret inquired carefully. "I'll be spending more time there," Ethan said. "The gardens need attention. Plants take time to establish themselves. You can't rush these things." Margaret nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Of course, sir. And the gardener position, should I make that permanent?" Ethan smiled, thinking of Riley's words about time and patience and growth. "Yes," he said simply, "very permanent. Some things are meant to be cultivated, not acquired." As autumn arrived, The Japanese garden began its seasonal transformation, maple leaves turning crimson and gold, grasses taking on amber hues, frost outlining the stones in the early mornings. Ethan and Riley worked side by side, preparing the plants for winter. Their conversations flowing more easily now, no longer employer and employee, but two people learning to see the world through each other's eyes. On a particularly golden afternoon, as they pruned the last of the summer growth, Riley looked up from her work and studied him thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "my father always taught me that a woman's value was in what she hadn't done, what she'd kept to herself. But my grandmother taught me something different. She said real value comes from what you choose to give, freely and on your own terms." Ethan set down his pruning shears, giving her his full attention. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Riley agreed. "She also said that when you find someone who sees you clearly, who values you for who you are, not what you represent or what you can provide, that's the rarest gift of all." Their eyes met across the garden bed, an unspoken understanding passing between them. "Some things can't be bought," Ethan said softly, echoing her words from months ago. "No," Riley agreed with a smile, "but they can be earned, with time, with patience, with respect." Later that evening, as they walked the garden paths in the twilight, their hands brushed against each other. Tentatively at first, then with quiet confidence their fingers intertwined, a connection freely offered, not demanded or purchased, but grown slowly, like the garden around them, out of mutual respect and genuine understanding. And Ethan Blackwood, who had spent a lifetime acquiring possessions, but never allowing himself to be possessed by love, finally understood the difference between price and value, between controlling and nurturing, between having and holding. In the garden they had created together, he had found not just beauty, but truth, and in Riley Morgan he had found not an acquisition, but a partner in the slow, patient work of growing something real, something that couldn't be bought, but only earned, day by day, season by season, choice by choice. Fin de la historia. Dear listeners, we hope Ethan and Riley's journey has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that true value isn't found in wealth or status, but in the authentic connections we nurture over time. For more emotional stories like this one, we've created a special playlist featuring equally captivating narratives. Just click the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of transformation and genuine love, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique